The wind off the Charles River did not blow that January night. It cut. It moved through the streets of downtown Crossing like something with intent, like something that had chosen its target and was not interested in mercy. It found the gaps in every coat, every collar, every layer of cardboard pressed against brick. It found them all, and it did not stop. Maya Callahan had learned in the 2 years since her life had come apart that the cold was not her enemy. Her enemy was stillness. The moment you stop moving, stop calculating, stop making the next small decision, the cold became something else entirely. It became a verdict. So, Maya did not sit still. Even now, crouched in the narrow alcove of a shuttered bakery on Washington Street, her fingers moving across the damp surface of a job application she had taken from the workforce center on Tremont that afternoon. She was in motion. Her handwriting was careful and deliberate despite the cold, despite the fact that her knuckles had cracked open at the joints sometime last week and had not fully healed since. The pen moved. The boxes got filled. Name, previous employer, dates of employment. Beside her, 8-year-old Ethan slept curled against her left side, his small body wrapped in every layer she had been able to find that morning, a wool blanket donated by a woman outside South Station, a oversized Red Sox sweatshirt 3 sizes too big taken from the clothing bin at the shelter on Tremont Street, before they had lost their place on the waiting list. His breathing was even, which was the only metric that mattered to Maya right now. Even breathing. No rattle. No fever heat rising from his forehead when she pressed her lips to it 40 minutes ago. She had been an administrative coordinator at a mid-sized property management firm in Back Bay, before everything had collapsed around her with the particular cruelty of cascading disasters. First, the company downsizing, then the pneumonia that had taken 6 weeks to clear, 6 weeks in which she burned through savings and missed the rent. Then the eviction. Then 2 years of this. 2 years of shelter waiting lists and day labor and forms filled out in bad light, with cracked hands always calculating, always moving forward in the small ways that were available to her. Because the moment she stopped calculating was the moment the cold became a verdict. Ethan coughed in his sleep, a short, dry sound that tightened something in Maya's chest, the way nothing else in the world could. She pressed her hand against the back of his neck. Cool. She exhaled slowly. The application form had a question near the bottom that she always hated. It asked for a permanent address. She had developed a system for that particular question. She wrote the address of the workforce center on Tremont. It was not technically a lie. She received mail there by arrangement. It was the kind of solution you arrived at after 2 years of learning to navigate a world that was not designed to accommodate people in her situation. A world full of forms and requirements built on the assumption that everyone had a fixed point from which they operated. Maya had become very good at finding the workarounds. It was, she had decided, the most transferable skill she had developed since losing everything. She was capping the pen when the Lincoln appeared. It came from the direction of Winter Street, moving slowly through the slush that had accumulated along the gutters since the afternoon. It was a town car, black and immaculate in a way that seemed almost aggressive against the grime of the surrounding street. It pulled to the curb directly in front of the alcove with a precision that did not feel accidental, and it stopped. Maya watched it the way she watched everything on the street at this hour, carefully, without obvious attention. The rear door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", wearing a charcoal overcoat that fit him in the way. Expensive things fit people who buy expensive things without thinking about it. His face was angular and unreadable, somewhere in his late 40s or early 50s, with close-cropped gray at his temples, and eyes that moved across his environment with the particular economy of someone professionally trained to assess threat and distance simultaneously. He did not look at the bakery window. He did not look at the passing couple hurrying along the far sidewalk. He looked directly at Maya. He crossed the sidewalk with measured steps and stopped 3 feet from the alcove entrance. Maya had already shifted her weight slightly, positioning herself between the man and Ethan without making the movement obvious. 2 years on the street had given her instincts she had not asked for. "Maya Callahan," the man said. It was not a question. "Who's asking?" Maya said. Her voice came out level, which she considered a reasonable accomplishment given that her heart was doing something irregular against her ribs. The man reached into the interior of his coat and produced an envelope. Heavy cream-colored stock, the kind that has weight to it, the kind that is meant to convey that the contents matter. Sealed with a circle of crimson wax impressed with an ornate letter C. "My name is Garrett Voss," the man said. "I've been retained by the law offices of Langley and Associates on State Street. I've been looking for you for 3 weeks, Miss Callahan." Maya looked at the envelope. She did not reach for it. She knew that seal. She had spent the better part of 15 years working to forget it. But the architecture of memory does not cooperate with that kind of intention. And the crimson C on the wax circle landed in her chest like something physical. "I don't want anything from him," Maya said. Her voice had dropped half a register without her intending it to. "I'm afraid I can't deliver that message," Voss said. His expression shifted by approximately nothing, but something around his eyes changed slightly. The faintest recalibration of whatever passed for feeling in a man like that. "Victor Callahan passed away 4 days ago. You are named in his last will and testament. There is a mandatory reading tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. A car will come to wherever you're staying." Before Maya could process the specific combination of words passed away, "will mandatory tomorrow," Voss set the envelope on the concrete beside her with the careful placement of someone setting down something they've been told is important. Then he turned and walked back to the Lincoln, which absorbed him and pulled away from the curb, and was gone. Maya sat for a long time looking at the crimson sea. Ethan stirred against her side and settled again. She picked up the envelope. She turned it over in her hands twice. Then she broke the seal. Inside was exactly what she expected. Official letterhead, legal language, the address of a firm on State Street, a time, a confirmation of her name and the assertion that her presence was required, and tucked against the inner fold of the envelope where it would not be immediately obvious, a smaller piece of paper. Not letterhead, not typed. A scrap, the kind torn from a lined notebook covered in handwriting she recognized with a jolt that moved through her whole body despite 15 years of determined distance. The handwriting was not steady. Victor Callahan's handwriting in every document she had seen growing up had been the handwriting of a man who believed in the precision of marks on paper. This was not that. This was the writing of a man whose hands had not been cooperating. She read it 3 times. Don't trust Prescott Langley. Don't trust anyone in that room. The combination is the one thing I never forgot. She sat with that for a moment. Then she folded the scrap of paper and put it in the inside pocket of her coat against her chest. She did not show it to anyone because there was no one to show it to. Victor Callahan was dead. The man who had built an empire of glass and concrete and cold calculation. The man who had looked at her across the kitchen table of their Beacon Hill townhouse when she was 17 years old and told her with the flat certainty of someone announcing a weather forecast that she was a disappointment and a liability, and that his door would be closed to her from that point forward. The man she had spent 15 years erasing from every part of herself she could reach was dead. She looked down at Ethan's sleeping face. She thought about the address on the letterhead. She thought about the cot at the shelter that was no longer available, and the job application in her hand, and the crack across the first knuckle of her right index finger that had not healed in 11 days. She folded the job application and put it in her pocket. In the morning, she would go to State Street. The offices of Langley and Associates occupied the 14th floor of a building on State Street that had been built in the 1980s and had spent the decades since accumulating the particular gravity of old money conducted through modern instruments. The lobby had marble floors and a security desk staffed by a man who looked at Maya's coat for half a second longer than was necessary before directing her to the elevators. The conference room on the 14th floor had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the financial district and the harbor beyond it, gray and choppy under an overcast January sky. The table was long and dark and reflected the overhead lighting in a way that made everything on its surface look deliberate. Prescott Langley sat at the head of it. He was the kind of man who had been handsome in a conventional way 30 years ago and had settled into his current appearance with the assurance of someone who had never needed to be uncertain about the reception he received in rooms like this one. Silver hair immaculate, gold-framed reading glasses, a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Maya had earned in the last 8 months combined. He looked at her across the table with an expression of precisely calibrated sympathy that she noted and filed away without reacting to. There were 2 junior associates flanking him, young men with matching haircuts and identical leather portfolio cases, neither of whom looked directly at Maya. Ethan sat beside her with his hands folded on the table in front of him, watching the harbor through the window with the total absorption of a child who has learned not to speak until spoken to in rooms full of adults. Maya kept her coat on. It was not a statement. The room was simply cold. Ms. Callahan. Langley began adjusting his glasses. Thank you for coming. I understand this is an unusual circumstance. Just tell me what it is. Maya said. I didn't come here for the setup. Something moved across Langley's expression and disappeared. He opened the leather-bound folder in front of him. Your father's estate is substantial and complex. Victor held significant assets across multiple financial institutions, including a considerable fidelity portfolio and several properties in New England and Europe. The total valuation of the estate after liabilities and preliminary assessments is approximately $450 million. The harbor was gray. A container ship moved along the outer channel, all of which, Langley continued, he has designated to pass to you entirely. Maya looked at him without speaking. However, Langley said, and the word carried the weight of something that had been carefully positioned. There is a condition. Before the assets are released to you or placed in trust for your son, you are required to fulfill a specific stipulation set out in Section 4 of the will. He slid a leather folder across the table. It stopped in front of Maya's hands. She opened it. Inside were aerial photographs of a dark landmass surrounded by gray Atlantic water, heavily forested, sheer cliff faces dropping to a rocky cove. At the highest point, a large Victorian structure of dark stone, its narrow windows looking out over the ocean like something that had been watching for a long time. Blackwood Isle, Langley said. A private island in Casco Bay off the coast of Maine. Your father purchased it approximately 20 years ago. He had a manor house constructed there over the following 2 years. What's the condition? Maya said. You must take up residence on the island for no less than 6 months continuously. If you leave the island for more than 48 hours at any point during that period, the entire estate defaults to a list of designated charitable organizations, and you receive nothing. The clock begins the day you arrive. Maya looked at the photographs. 6 months on an island, miles from the nearest police station, miles from a doctor, a school, a grocery store, any of the infrastructure on which ordinary life depends. She looked at Ethan, who was still watching the harbor. She thought about what she had in her coat pocket, the cracked knuckles, the cot that was no longer available, the job application with the workforce center address in the permanent address field. What are the logistics? She said. Langley explained them with the smooth competence of a man who had prepared for this answer. The island had a diesel generator, a satellite internet connection, water filtration, a kitchen stocked for long-term occupation, monthly supply drops by hired boat, a maritime radio in the study for emergencies, a satellite phone in the event of genuine crisis. And if I have a medical situation, Maya said, if Ethan gets sick, the captain who handles supply drops is available for genuine emergencies. The radio reaches the Coast Guard directly. Maya looked at the photographs one more time. The stone manor on its cliff, the dark pines reaching toward the overcast sky. Fine, she said. We're going. She did not say it because $450 million was a number she could process emotionally. She said it because it was the next decision available to her, and she had learned to make the next decision. As she closed the folder, she kept her hand flat on the table, and her face neutral. And she did not let Langley see her register the fact that she had just made the most dangerous choice of her life. The Atlantic in January is not the ocean of summer photographs or travel magazines. It is a gray and genuinely indifferent body of water that moves according to its own physics with complete disregard for the preferences of the people attempting to cross it. The trawler that Langley's firm had arranged a working vessel called the Albatross out of Portland spent the 40-minute crossing from the mainland doing things with its hull that Maya would not have believed possible before experiencing them directly. She stood on the forward deck rather than below, because the cabin smelled of diesel and old fish and because she needed to be able to see where they were going. Ethan was below with a bucket and the philosophical resignation of a child who has decided that if something unavoidable is happening, the correct response is to endure it without drama. Captain Hayes stood at the wheel and said nothing for most of the crossing. He was somewhere in his mid-60s with the weathered face of a man who has spent 4 decades in the kind of weather that the Maine coast provides and the particular quality of silence that belongs to people who have said what they mean too many times to feel like saying it again. He spoke once as Blackwood Isle resolved itself out of the gray horizon ahead of them. A dark shape that grew into a dark, massed, jagged cliffs and heavy forest, and at the summit the angular silhouette of a large structure against the overcast sky. He didn't build that to live in, Hayes said without turning from the wheel. He built it to hide in. Maya looked at the island. "What do people around here say about it?" she said. Hayes was quiet for a moment. That the man who built it never looked at peace when he was on it. That the boats that brought the construction crew out came back lighter than they should have. "What does that mean?" "Don't know," Hayes said, and he did not sound like a man speculating. He sounded like a man who had decided that some things were not his business to know. He brought the Albatross into the cove with the practiced economy of a man who has docked in rough water all his life. And he helped Maya and Ethan transfer their supplies and gear to the wooden dock without comment or sentiment. A dozen crates arranged by Langley's firm dry goods, canned food, winter clothing, first aid supplies. When the last crate was on the dock, Hayes looked at Maya for a moment with an expression she could not entirely read. Something between warning and something else. Something that might have been in a different man apology. "Radio's in the study," he said. "Channel 16 for Coast Guard. I'll be back in 30 days with fresh supplies. Don't try to signal mainland without a real reason. Weather windows are short in February." The Albatross swung away from the dock, its engine rising to a working pitch. And then it was moving back across the gray water and the dock was groaning under Maya's feet. And Ethan was standing beside her looking up at the island with an expression she recognized as the one he got when he was deciding whether something was worth being afraid of. "Come on," she said. "Let's go see what we're working with." The path from the dock to the manor took 20 minutes with the supply cart, which had been left near the dock's landward end and which complained continuously about the terrain. The path wound upward through the pines, which were the kind of dark and heavy branched trees that do not let much light through even in full summer, and let through almost none in January. The ground was frozen and uneven, The wind moved through the upper branches with a sound that was not quite like any sound Maya associated with wind. She did not let herself think about whether she was afraid of this place. Fear was not a useful input at the moment. The front doors of Sterling Manor were heavy oak iron banded with a brass lock that accepted the key Langley had given her with a substantial click that echoed off the stone of the entryway. She pushed both doors open together. The foyer was vast and cold and dark. A crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling 20 feet above, catching the pale light from the open doors and throwing it in fractured patterns across the black marble floor. White dust sheets covered the furniture in the parlor. Off to the right, shapes beneath them, suggesting sofas and chairs frozen mid-conversation. A grand staircase swept upward along the left wall, its carved banister dark with age, and something that might have been neglect or might have been intention. The smell was particular beeswax old paper, something metallic underneath. "It's cold," Ethan said, his voice small in the large space. "We'll get the generator running and it'll warm up," Maya said. "Come on, help me find the kitchen." She had studied the architectural plans that Langley's firm had included with the supply inventory, and she navigated now from memory down the wide corridor off the foyer's east side. The kitchen was where the plans indicated a large, professionally equipped space that had clearly been designed by someone who cooked seriously, or who employed someone who did. Industrial range, a refrigerator that hummed back to life when the generator caught and held. Cabinet space she could not immediately find a reason for. She made soup from a can, while Ethan sat on a high stool at the central island and watched her with the particular quality of attention he gave to things when he was thinking about something else entirely. She did not ask him what he was thinking about. She had learned that he would tell her when he was ready. After dinner, she settled him in the largest bedroom on the second floor in a four-poster bed whose canopy made him look very small and whose mattress made him look very comfortable. She sat with him until his breathing evened out. Then she went back downstairs. She needed to understand the place. She needed to understand the man who had built it. The study was at the end of a long, unlit corridor on the ground floor, behind a door that had been designed to resemble a wall panel rather than an entrance. She almost missed it. She pushed it open and found a room organized around a massive mahogany desk with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on 3 walls and a fireplace on the 4th. Above the fireplace, in a gilded frame that was larger than was strictly necessary, hung a portrait of Victor Callahan. Maya had not seen her father's face in 15 years. She had not sought it out. Not in newspapers, not in the occasional mention his company received in Boston business coverage. She had been systematic about the removal. The portrait showed a man in his early 60s with a strong jaw and light blue eyes and an expression of absolute authority over his own surroundings. He had been a handsome man in the way that certain powerful men are handsome, not soft, not warm, but structurally imposing in a way that reads as attractive until you understand what's behind it. Maya looked at the portrait for approximately 4 seconds. Then she looked at the desk. It was immaculate except for one thing. Directly in the center, placed with the precision of something intentionally left rather than casually forgotten, was a leather-bound journal. Not a ledger, not a financial document, a journal. She sat in the chair behind the desk and opened it. The first 3/4 of the book were written in Victor Callahan's controlled, precise script. Dates, observations, records of decisions made and outcomes assessed, the internal monologue of a man who treated his own thinking as a matter of official record. She skimmed these pages looking for what she needed, looking for the shape of the thing she had begun to understand was here. Then the writing changed. The last 40 pages of the journal were written in a different hand. Same pen, same ink. But the marks themselves were uneven, crowded. The letters sometimes pressing into each other with an urgency that the earlier pages entirely lacked. She turned to the last entry, dated 1 week before his death. She read it carefully. Then she read it again. Victor Callahan had not built his empire on real estate alone. In the autumn of 1998, in the weeks surrounding the Russian financial crisis and the collapse of long-term capital management, when markets were moving in directions that created enormous opportunities for people with no ethical constraints on how they used those opportunities, Victor had operated as what the entry called a shadow broker. He had facilitated the movement of vast sums of money for Eastern European oligarchs and corrupt Wall Street executives who needed their assets to disappear from one place and reappear in another, cleaned and restructured. He had been very good at this. He had made himself indispensable to men who valued competence above everything and who did not tolerate the alternative. And then, at the moment when his position was most secure and his access to his clients' assets was most complete, he had stolen from them $200 million, redirected through a series of offshore accounts and eventually into the infrastructure of his legitimate real estate portfolio, where it had been absorbed and normalized and made to look like the proceeds of successful commercial development. He had then built this island, this fortress in Casco Bay, and stocked it with everything he needed to survive and to preserve the proof of what had been done. The last entry was not calm. They know. The offshore accounts were a distraction I built for exactly this moment. The real evidence, everything that proves what they did and what I did, and what I took, is here beneath the foundation. I built this place as a fortress, and now it has become exactly what I built it to be. There is no sanctuary for a man like me. Only delay. If anyone reads this, do not trust Langley. Do not trust the firm. I sent Maya here not to inherit, but to finish what I could not. She is the only one I ever trusted with the thing that mattered most to me. She does not know this. She will understand when she finds the door. Maya sat with the journal in her hands for a long time. The fire had gone out during their dinner, and the room was growing cold again, and the wind outside had found a gap somewhere in the upper structure of the house that it was using to produce a low, continuous sound, somewhere between a moan and a whistle. She was 45 years old when Victor had stolen $200 million from men who did not forgive that kind of thing. She was 32 now, nearly 27 years. She thought about Garrett Voss standing on the sidewalk outside the closed bakery on Washington Street, taller than necessary eyes that moved like a professional's eyes, tapping his coat once after he set the envelope down, a gesture she had catalogued and not yet found the correct interpretation for. She thought about the note in the envelope, the one that was not on letterhead. Don't trust Langley. Don't trust anyone in that room. She set the journal on the desk and stood up. The house settled around her, old timber adjusting to the cold. The gap in the upper structure continued its sound. Outside, the Atlantic moved against the base of the cliffs with a rhythm that was not quite regular, not quite irregular. And then beneath her feet she heard something else. Thud, thud, thud. A pause. Thud, thud, thud. It was heavy and rhythmic, and it was coming from directly beneath where she was standing. From beneath the floor of the study, from somewhere below the foundation of the house. Maya stood completely still for a moment, listening. Then she retrieved the iron poker from beside the cold fireplace, closed the journal, and went to find the source of the sound. The kitchen corridor ended in a door she had taken for a large pantry, its heavy oak surface flush with the surrounding wall, and without any obvious marking. The blueprints showed a basement access behind it. She opened it. Stone steps descended into darkness. The air that rose from below was immediately colder than the kitchen, carrying the smell of damp concrete and diesel fuel and something mineral like the inside of a well. Thud, thud, thud. She felt it through her feet now. A vibration transmitted through the stone. She found the light switch on the right-hand wall 12 steps down, where the blueprints had indicated it would be. Fluorescent tubes buzzed and flickered, and caught illuminating a space larger than she had expected. It was not a cellar in the traditional sense. It was a purpose-built utility-level. 2 large diesel generators currently idle, their tanks plumbed into a buried reservoir she had seen listed on the supply inventory, a water filtration system that covered most of the east wall. Copper piping in organized runs along the ceiling, and in the corner an industrial sump pump that was vibrating against its copper outflow pipe with the mechanical aggression of a machine fighting a jammed valve. Thud, thud, thud. The sound she had heard through the floor. Maya exhaled. She crossed the basement floor toward the pump, navigating between the generators, and reached for the main shut-off valve. Her boot caught on something. She looked down. The floor was poured concrete, solid and unremarkable except for what she had caught her foot on a steel rail, half an inch proud of the surface embedded in the concrete in a straight line, running from the center of the room to the far wall. She followed it with her eyes to where it met the wall, and then she looked at the wall itself. What appeared to be foundation concrete, gray and featureless, was not entirely seamless. There was a seam in it that she had taken for a stress fracture in the pour, but it was not random. It was a vertical line, perfectly straight, running from floor to ceiling, and 12 inches from it was another parallel line, and between them was the indication of a horizontal track at floor level and a mechanism at ceiling level that was consistent with a large sliding door. The pump's vibration had dislodged a section of false paneling to the left of the hidden door, revealing a digital keypad embedded in the stone. Maya stood looking at it. She thought about the last line of the journal entry. She will understand when she finds the door. She approached the keypad slowly. 8 digits. Month, day, year format, she guessed from the way the entry protocol was displayed. She tried Victor's birthday. The pad rejected it with a flat electronic tone. She tried the date he had incorporated his first real estate company, a date she remembered from documents she had seen as a child and filed away in memory without knowing why. The pad rejected it again. She stood in the cold basement with the pump thudding its irregular rhythm behind her, and the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and the smell of damp concrete rising around her. She thought about what he had written. The combination is the one thing I never forgot. She typed in her own birthday, August 14th, 1993. The digital display flickered once, and then the room filled with the sound of hydraulics. The concrete door moved. It moved with the weight of something engineered for permanence, sliding back along the steel rail with a vibration she felt through the soles of her boots, heavy and deliberate. And as it moved, it revealed a darkness beyond. That was complete. A darkness with a quality different from ordinary darkness, the quality of air that has not been exchanged in a long time. Maya reached inside and found the light switch. When the lights came on, she went still. The room was approximately 30 feet long and 20 wide. Climate controlled, the air dry and cool and carrying the faint smell of preservation. Along 3 walls, heavy steel shelving held stacks of silver bullion in numbered rows, their surfaces dull and faintly reflective under the overhead lights. She registered this detail and moved past it, because the bullion was not the center of the room. The center was a long metal table, and covering every inch of its surface were manila dossiers, dozens of them stacked and organized with a precision that spoke of someone who had spent considerable time arranging evidence for a specific future purpose. The top documents bore the logos of Credit Suisse and Bear Stearns. The dates in the headers were from August and September of 1998. She opened the nearest file and began to read, and as she read, the full shape of what her father had done and hidden and why he had built this island assembled itself in her understanding with the cold clarity of something that cannot be undone, deuced once seen. And then she saw the separate envelope. It was at the far end of the table, away from the organized files, placed with the careful deliberateness of the last act of a man who knew he was running out of time. Her name was written on the front in that same unsteady handwriting from the journal's final pages. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper in Victor Callahan's hand. Less frantic than the journal entries, more controlled, as though he had found a reserve of steadiness for this particular task. You are the only one I ever trusted to do this correctly, not because you are my daughter, because I watched you survive things that would have destroyed anyone I knew, and you survived them without becoming what they tried to make you. The combination you used tonight is the only thing I have never forgotten. You should understand what that means. I am sorry I never found the language for it while I could still use it. Do what needs to be done. Maya stood in the vault of her father's hidden life for a long time. Above her, the generators were silent. The sump pump had stopped its thudding when she'd inadvertently shifted the valve housing in her approach to the door. She was holding this letter when she heard Ethan's voice from the direction of the basement stairs. "Mom?" She turned. He was standing at the threshold of the vault entrance in his oversized sweatshirt, rubbing his eyes, his small face confused and pale. "Ethan, go back upstairs." She moved quickly, steering him gently away from the vault back toward the stairs. "It's just an old pipe making noise. Everything's fine. Let's get you back to bed." She pulled the vault door closed behind her with the keypad, heard the hydraulics engage, felt the vibration of the door settling back into its sealed position. She guided Ethan up the stairs with her hand on his shoulder. They were halfway up when the sound came, not from below, from outside. The perimeter alarm system mounted on the exterior of the house, according to the blueprints she had memorized, was a standard motion detection circuit designed to alert on unauthorized approach to the dock. The sound it made when triggered was a shrill electronic pulse, two short and one long, that cut through the nighttime silence of the house like something that had been waiting to happen. Someone had just come ashore on Blackwood Isle. Maya stopped on the stairs with her hand on Ethan's shoulder, and her mind already moving, already assessing, already sorting what she knew from what she needed to know. She thought about the photographs she had seen downstairs in the files, the names attached to account numbers, the amounts. $200 million that belonged to men who did not forget. She thought about Garrett Voss on the sidewalk in Boston, the way his eyes moved, the precision with which he had set down the envelope. She thought about the note in her coat pocket. "Don't trust anyone in that room." She pressed her lips to the top of Ethan's head for exactly 2 seconds. Then she straightened. "I need you to be quiet," she said, "and I need you to stay close to me. Can you do that?" Ethan looked at her with the particular gravity that children develop when they understand something is serious without understanding what it is. "Yes," he said. Maya moved to the small window at the landing's turn, the one with the view over the south side of the house and the path that wound down through the pines to the dock. The security light at the dock's edge was motion activated and had triggered with the alarm. It threw its hard white light across the cove. In its beam, 3 figures were moving up the path toward the manor single file, dressed in dark tactical gear. The equipment slung across their chests was unmistakable even at this distance and in this light. At the front of the 3, moving with the measured precision of a man who had done this before in other places, was Garrett Voss. He had not come for her. He had never come for her. He had come for what was in the vault, and she had just opened it. Fear is a tool. Maya Callahan had learned this not in any classroom or from any book, but from the specific education of 2 winters spent sleeping in places not designed for sleeping, of navigating a world that had made clear it did not intend to accommodate her. Fear sharpens the senses. It accelerates the processing of available information. It strips away everything that is not immediately relevant to survival and leaves behind only what matters. The problem with fear is that most people, when they encounter it in sufficient quantity, forget that it is a tool, and begin to treat it as a weather condition, something that happens to them rather than something they can use. Maya stood at the landing window for exactly 4 seconds after identifying Garrett Voss on the path below. 4 seconds of pure input cataloging what she could see. 3 figures, tactical gear weapons slung rather than raised, moving at a pace that was deliberate but not frantic. They were not running. They were professionals who believed they had time. They had come in from the ocean side, which meant their boat was in the cove, and the cove was the only viable exit from the island by water. The radio in the study channel 16 for Coast Guard. The satellite phone she had seen listed on the supply inventory, which she had not yet located. 4 seconds. Then she moved. Ethan. She kept her voice at the level she used when she needed him to understand that something was real without making it into the kind of thing that produced panic. We are going to do exactly what I say, and we are going to do it quietly and quickly. Those are the 2 rules right now. Quiet and quick. Do you understand? Ethan nodded. His eyes were wide, but his jaw was set with a steadiness that she had noticed in him before. In difficult situations, a quality that she recognized and did not know what to do with. The recognition of, because it was a quality she associated with a version of childhood she had not intended to give him. She took him by the hand, and they went up, not down, moving silently along the 2nd-floor corridor toward the study at the far end of the ground floor, required passing through the foyer. And the foyer had windows that faced the front approach. Not yet. First the radio. First a way to reach someone outside this island. She found the maritime radio in the study on the desk's left side, exactly where the supply inventory had listed it. She kept the lights off and worked by the pale ambient light from the window, finding the power switch, finding channel 16, pressing the transmit button. Static. She released and pressed again. More static, a particular quality of static that was not the ordinary interference of distance or weather, but the flat engineered blankness of a signal being actively suppressed. She tried channel 22, the same. She tried the emergency frequency and got the same engineered silence. They had jammed the island's radio communications before they came ashore. She had perhaps 90 seconds before they reached the front doors. She did not waste any of those seconds being afraid of what the jammed radio meant. The dumbwaiter was in the kitchen. She had noted it on the blueprints without registering it as significant, a manual service elevator built into the wall between the kitchen and the dining room, originally designed to move food between the kitchen level and the formal dining room on the 2nd floor. Large enough, according to the blueprints, for a substantial load. She had not thought of it as anything other than an architectural curiosity until this moment. She moved through the dark house with Ethan's hand in hers, navigating from memory. From the blueprints she had spent 2 hours studying the previous evening, because understanding the structure of the place she was confined to had seemed like the kind of information that would eventually be relevant. She had not known how quickly. The kitchen was dark and cold, the generator's warmth not yet having fully penetrated the outer rooms. She found the dumbwaiter in the wall beside the large refrigerator, its wooden door sliding upward on its counterweight. to reveal a space approximately 3 feet square. She had estimated Ethan's dimensions without meaning to, and she was right. He would fit. "Get in," she said. Ethan looked at the dumbwaiter and then at her without speaking. "It goes up to the 3rd floor," she said. "I need you to ride it up and then go to the linen closet at the end of the hall. There's a crawl space behind the back wall of the closet. The panel comes off if you push the lower left corner. Get in there and do not come out, and do not make any sound until I come for you. Do you understand me? Mom, do you understand me, Ethan?" He got in. She had to fold his knees slightly. He fit. She looked at him for one moment in the dark kitchen, his face pale and serious in the faint light from the window. "You are going to be fine," she said. "I need you to trust me." "I trust you," he said. She began to haul on the rope hand over hand, feeling the counterweight system take, and the car begin to rise. She pulled steadily and quietly until the slack in the rope told her the car had reached the upper landing. Then she tied off the rope on the cleat mounted to the wall for that purpose and turned to face the kitchen. The front doors of the manor opened with a sound she felt through the soles of her boots, even at this distance. Not a crash, not a forced breach, a controlled, deliberate opening which meant they had a key or a means of bypassing the lock that was quieter than force. Professionals. She heard footsteps in the foyer. She heard Voss's voice, unhurried, carrying through the stone corridors of the house, with the clarity of a man who did not consider it necessary to lower his voice, because he did not believe the person he was speaking to had any meaningful options. "Maya." A pause. "There's no benefit to making this difficult. We know what Victor hid here. We know you've been in the house long enough to have found the lower level. Give us the access code and you and your son take our boat back to the mainland tonight. You have my word." She was already moving toward the industrial cleaning supply closet at the far end of the kitchen. She had seen it on her initial survey of the space, a full-height cabinet beside the utility sink stocked with cleaning supplies of the institutional variety, the kind purchased in bulk for a house maintained by hired staff. She found what she needed without turning on the light, working by touch by the shape and weight of containers. A gallon jug of industrial-grade ammonia, the concentrated variety used for heavy floor cleaning. A large bottle of high-concentration bleach. She set them on the counter beside the utility sink with the careful movements of someone handling something that required respect. She had learned the relevant chemistry not in school but on the street during a period 18 months ago, when a large encampment near the South Bay Transit Hub had been cleared by city contractors who had used industrial cleaning agents in quantities and concentrations that had required several people to leave the area for medical treatment. She had not left. She had watched. She had paid attention because paying attention to things that could hurt you was how you avoided being hurt by them. Chloramine gas. The combination of ammonia and bleach in sufficient concentration in an enclosed space. Not lethal in open air. In a confined space at the point of initial reaction, enough to incapacitate immediately and thoroughly. She poured the ammonia into the mop bucket standing against the wall beside the kitchen's main entrance. A substantial amount. She set the bleach bottle on the counter beside the bucket with the cap loosened. She could hear them in the dining room now adjacent to the kitchen. One set of footsteps moving closer. Voss would have sent one man to check the kitchen while he and the third held the main points of the ground floor. She positioned herself beside the kitchen's rear service entrance, which was set into the wall, perpendicular to the main kitchen door, leading to the narrow staircase. The blueprints called the service stairs. She had already confirmed it was unlocked. She had her hand on the bleach bottle. The kitchen door swung open. A large man in wet tactical gear came through it, with his rifle raised, moving in the trained pattern of a professional clearing a space sweeping left and then right. His eyes were adjusting from the relative light of the dining room to the darkness of the kitchen. He had 1.5 seconds of adjustment time. She used them. She threw the bleach directly into the ammonia in the mop bucket with the full force of a woman who had been carrying boxes and pushing supply carts and hauling ropes all day. And she was already through the service door and moving up the stairs before the chemical reaction reached its first second. The sound the man made was not a scream. It was a short, involuntary sound of shock. And then the more sustained and terrible sound of someone whose respiratory system has encountered something it cannot negotiate with. She heard the rifle clatter on the stone floor. She heard him fall. She took the service stairs 2 at a time in the dark, not running, moving fast, but quietly, her hand trailing the wall for guidance. Behind her, from the direction of the dining room, she heard Voss's voice, no longer unhurried. Yuri. A pause. Yuri. Harder now. Alert. She reached the second-floor landing and kept moving. She needed distance between herself and the ground floor. She needed time to think. She went through the master suite because the blueprints had shown her something useful. A ventilation grate in the ceiling of the adjoining dressing room, large enough for a person of her dimensions, connected to a duct system that ran through the upper floor of the house. Old houses of this type and period often had elaborate duct systems for the original coal heating infrastructure systems that had been retrofitted for modern heating but retained their original dimensions. She had noted this on the blueprints with the same instinct that had made her note the dumbwaiter, the instinct of someone who has learned to identify exits before she needs them. She smashed the brass lamp on the windowsill against the bedroom window as she passed it, sending glass out into the night. A sound and a misdirection. Then she was in the dressing room, climbing the built-in mahogany shelving on the far wall. Her boots finding purchase on the shelf edges with the balance of someone who has spent time sleeping on narrow surfaces and walking on uncertain ground. She pushed the ventilation grate up and out of its housing, and it fell into the duct above her with a metallic sound she could not avoid. She pulled herself up and in. The ductwork was tight and dark and coated with a layer of dust that had been accumulating since the house was last staffed, which the supply inventory suggested had been 18 months ago. She moved through it on her elbows and knees in the complete darkness, counting turns from the memorized layout of the floor plan, navigating by the structural logic of a duct system that followed the rooms below it. Below her, she could hear Voss and his remaining man entering the master suite. She broke the window. The second man's voice, younger than Voss, with an accent that placed him somewhere in the mid-Atlantic states. "She didn't jump," Voss said. He sounded entirely controlled, which was somehow worse than anger would have been. "She's in the walls. Check the dressing room. Check every access point." Maya stopped moving and lay still in the duct, her cheek against the cold metal, and breathed slowly and calculated. She had incapacitated one. One was searching the second floor with Voss, and Voss himself was in the room below her thinking. That was the problem with Voss. He was not the kind of threat that made mistakes out of anger or impatience. He was the kind of threat that thought. She needed to divide them further. She needed Voss separated from his man, and she needed to do it in a way that gave her control of the timing. She thought about the vault. She thought about what Voss had said in the foyer. "We know what Victor hid here. We know you've been in the lower level." He needed the code. He could not force the vault without destroying the contents, and destroying the contents was apparently not acceptable to whoever had sent him, because the contents were presumably the leverage that had made Victor Callahan worth leaving alive for 27 years, rather than simply eliminating him the moment they had identified his theft. The files in that vault named names. Specific names with specific account numbers and specific transaction records. They were worth more as evidence than as destroyed evidence, which meant whoever Voss was working for needed them intact. She needed to use that. The vault needed to be both the bait and the trap. She crawled forward through the ductwork until she was positioned by her count above the section of upper hallway that ran along the back of the house adjacent to the grand staircase. She found the grate by feel a square of slightly lighter darkness in the surrounding dark. She positioned her boots against it. She kicked it out. The grate dropped 20 feet and hit the marble floor of the lower hall with a crash that was designed to be heard throughout the house. She heard both men come out of the master suite. She heard them position themselves below the open duct, looking up. She moved. Fast now, not quiet, back through the ductwork to the junction she had identified on the way, in the branch that led toward the third floor access, pulling herself forward with her elbows. Her shoulders burning with the effort, the dust rising around her face. She came out through a grate on the third floor that opened into the linen closet at the end of the hall, pushing the panel inward, dropping to the floor and standing up in the confined space in the dark. She pressed her ear to the closet door and listened. The house below her was moving footsteps on the stairs, Voss coordinating controlled. She opened the closet door and stepped into the third floor hallway, and then she stopped because something had changed, and the change required her to recalibrate everything. The door at the far end of the third floor hall. The door to the small room the blueprints had labeled a secondary storage space was open. She had not opened it. She had not sent Ethan to that room. She had sent Ethan to the crawl space behind the linen closet. And the linen closet was where she had just come from. And there was no one in it, which meant Ethan had moved, which meant something had caused him to move. She crossed the hallway in silence and went through the open door. The room was small, barely 12 feet square, lined on two walls, with built-in shelving that held the accumulated miscellany of a house kept in seasonal use. Canvas tarps, spare lamp oil. coils of rope, hurricane lanterns. Ethan was standing at the far end of the room with his hand on the paneling of the rear wall, looking at something in the darkness behind a section of shelving that had been pulled outward on a hinge mechanism. He turned when he heard her enter, and his face in the darkness showed relief. And something else. Something that she identified after a moment as the specific expression of a child who has found something he does not know how to explain. "Mom," he whispered, "there's someone in here." Maya crossed the room in 4 steps. Behind the hinged section of shelving in a space approximately 4 feet deep that ran along the rear wall of the room was a man. He was seated on the floor with his back against the stone of the wall, his wrists bound in front of him with a heavy-duty zip tie, his ankles similarly secured. A strip of cloth had been wound around his head at mouth level. He was conscious. His eyes, which had the exhausted, hollow quality of someone who had been in this position for a long time, moved from Ethan to Maya and held on her with an intensity that was not panic, but something closer to desperate recognition. He was somewhere in his late 60s, white-haired, thin, with the papery skin of a man who had not been adequately fed or adequately warm for a considerable period of time. Maya pulled the cloth from his mouth. He exhaled once a long breath of what seemed like pure relief at being able to do so without restriction. Then he said, "You're Maya Callahan." "Who are you?" she said. "Gerald Marsh," he said. "I was Victor Callahan's chief accountant for 19 years. I've been in this room for 8 months. 8 months. Victor had been dead for less than 2 weeks. Maya processed this and what it meant and moved to the zip ties on his wrists, working the knot in the cloth that had been used as a secondary binding above the plastic. Her fingers found the weakness in the knot and worked it. "Can you walk?" "I don't know," he said. "I've been moving around the room when I can. They brought food. Not enough." "Who brought food?" "Langley sent someone. A different man. Every few weeks. Prescott Langley, the senior partner with the gold-framed glasses and the calculated sympathy, who had constructed the terms of a will designed to deliver Maya to this island, like a key being delivered to a lock." The zip ties came loose. Marsh brought his hands in front of him and flexed them slowly, his face tightening with the particular pain of returning circulation. "Victor kept you here," Maya said. "Victor asked me to come here voluntarily 8 months ago," Marsh said. "He told me it was the only way to keep me safe. That when the time came, my testimony would be the piece of evidence that the other documents alone couldn't provide." I agreed. I didn't know he was going to die. "What can you testify to?" "Everything," Marsh said. "Every transaction, every name, every account number. I helped structure the original trades in 1998. I kept the records. And I can testify to the identities of the current members of the network, the ones who have been operating continuously since then, because Victor showed me the updated files 6 months before he died. The network didn't dissolve after 1998. It contracted and restructured. It has been operating in some form ever since." Maya looked at him for a moment. She looked at Ethan, who was watching Marsh with the serious attention of someone filing information. Then, from below them, Voss's voice rose through the house, no longer conversational. He had found Yuri or Yuri's absence, or both. Maya. His voice had changed quality. The patience was still there, but the warmth was entirely gone. You've made your point. Now we are going to talk about what happens next, and I want you to understand that the conversation will be shorter and more pleasant if you make it so voluntarily. She helped Marsh to his feet. He was unsteady, but he held. She looked at Ethan. "You did exactly right," she said. She said it quietly and meant it. "Now I need you to stay with Mr. Marsh, and I need you to keep him quiet. And I need both of you to stay in this room until I come back. The same rules as before. Quiet and still." "What are you going to do?" Ethan said. "I'm going to end this," she said. The antique intercom system she had noticed on her initial exploration of the manor was a period installation, a relic of the era in which houses of this size employed staffs that needed to be coordinated across multiple floors without the use of telephones. A network of brass-housed speaker units, one per major room, connected through the original wiring of the house to a central panel on the second-floor landing. She had noted it on the blueprints. She had noted it specifically because the panel on the second-floor landing also contained, according to the supply inventories section, on building systems and emergency lockdown control for the subterranean vault, a feature Victor had apparently specified during construction, and which had been described in the inventory as a fire suppression and unauthorized access deterrent. A single red button behind a small hinged cover. Engaging it would trigger the vault's hermetic seal, closing the blast door on its emergency protocol, which locked from the outside and could only be overridden by the central control panel in the study with a separate code. She needed Voss in the foyer. She needed his second man in the basement. She needed to use the only leverage available to her, which was the vault itself. She moved to the third-floor balcony above the grand staircase and the foyer, staying in the shadow of the upper hallway, until she had confirmed the positions of both men below. Voss was in the foyer at the base of the staircase, looking up. His second man was visible through the corridor entrance to the kitchen hall, moving in that direction, looking for access to the lower level. Good. She stepped into the light. Voss looked up. Whatever he had been prepared for, whatever variables his professional calculation had been running through, Maya Callahan, standing on the third-floor balcony holding her father's leather-bound journal, out over the railing, was apparently not among them. She saw the recalibration happen in his face. "I know what this is," she said. Her voice carried down the stairwell with the clarity she had not expected, and then understood the house had been designed for this, for voices carrying from the upper floor. The acoustic architecture of a time when addresses were made from elevated positions to assembled household staffs. My father's last journal. He lists everything. Names, account numbers, the original transfer routes from 1998, and the updated membership of the current network. All of it, in his own handwriting, in a format that a federal prosecutor could use tomorrow morning. Voss looked at the journal. She could see him calculating. "Drop the book, Maya," he said. "That's a copy. The real evidence is in the vault, and we both know it. The journal is not a copy, she said, and if I drop it into the fireplace in the study behind me, you go back to your employers with nothing but a story about a woman in a stone house who outran 3 of you. Think about how that conversation goes. Voss was still for a long moment. What do you want? He said. Send your man down to the basement, she said. I'll read the access code to him through the intercom, and he can verify that the documents are intact. Once he confirms, you leave your weapons on the floor. You take the silver and you leave this island. You came for evidence. The silver is the value. Take it and go. A silence that lasted several seconds. The vault has a time lock mechanism, Maya said, adding the detail with the precision of a gambler who knows when to commit to a hand. The code only works if it's entered from inside the house while I hold the secondary release from up here. If you shoot me, the door seals permanently. You leave with nothing. Voss looked at her for a long moment. She held the journal steady over the railing and held his gaze and did not move. Go, Voss said to his man. The second man moved through the corridor toward the kitchen hall and the basement stairs. Maya tracked his footsteps by sound counting seconds against the mental map of the route through the kitchen. Through the pantry door, down the stone stairs across the utility level to the vault door. 60 to 70 seconds. She moved sideways along the balcony to the intercom panel on the wall at the balcony's end. She kept one hand on the journal and used the other to flip up the small hinged cover over the red emergency lockdown button. She pressed the intercom transmit button for the basement channel and waited. He's at the door, Voss called up from below. Read the code. She pressed transmit. August 14th, 1993. Far below, transmitted through the stone and timber of the house, she heard the hydraulic system engage, the vault door opening. A pause. He's inside, Voss said. He confirms the documents are present. He confirms the silver. Good, Maya said. She pressed the red button. The sound it produced was not large. A single firm click from the panel, and then transmitted upward through the foundation and the floors and the walls of the house. The heavy terminal sound of the vault's emergency seal engaging the blast door, dropping into its locked position, and underneath it, barely audible, the abrupt cessation of the second man's movement as the door closed and the reality of his situation became apparent. And then, muffled by 3 feet of reinforced concrete, the sound of fists. Voss looked up from the foyer. His composure broke, not completely. Not into something as unsophisticated as panic, but the surface cracked, and underneath it was the specific rage of a professional who has been outmaneuvered by someone he had not adequately assessed. He raised the sidearm he had kept at his hip through the entire conversation, the weapon he had not needed to raise before, because he had believed the situation was under control. Maya was already moving. She had been holding the journal at her right side, and she threw it now with the motion she had developed over 2 years of learning to use whatever she had available as whatever she needed it to be. The book turned twice in the air and struck the iron chain above the chandelier at the point she had selected 2 hours earlier, when she had stood in the foyer on her initial survey of the house and noted the chain's lowest link and its relationship to the tension of the fixture below it, and had spent 20 minutes with the iron poker from the study's fireplace, working the link at that specific point loose without detaching it, leaving it held by approximately 15% of its original structural integrity. The journal hit it, and the chain separated, and the chandelier fell. 2 tons of crystal and iron released from 20 feet encountered the marble floor of the foyer with a sound that Maya felt in her teeth. The foyer filled instantaneously with the white explosion of shattering crystal, a sound that seemed to last longer than it should have, that seemed to reverberate through the stone of the house for several seconds after the initial impact. Then, silence. Maya stood on the balcony above the wreckage and breathed. The house was very still. Outside, the wind moved through the pines. The Atlantic moved against the base of the cliffs. The generator hummed its constant note from somewhere beneath the kitchen floor. She gripped the balcony railing with both hands and leaned on it, and allowed herself 30 seconds of standing still. Then she straightened. She went back to the storage room and opened the door. Ethan and Marsh were exactly where she had left them. Ethan's face when she opened the door went through something complicated and arrived at an expression she recognized and was not prepared for pure relief. So complete it was almost grief. She crossed the room and held him for a moment. "You did everything right," she said into the top of his head. "You did everything exactly right." "I found him," Ethan said, his voice compressed. "I found him because I heard something." "I know," she said. That mattered. She let him go and looked at Marsh. "Can you move?" "Yes," he said. They went down together carefully, navigating the second floor and the main staircase with deliberate attention. Marsh using the banister for support. Ethan staying close to Maya's side. At the base of the stairs, she kept them both away from the foyer, away from the wreckage, and moved toward the study. Garrett Voss's tactical jacket was where it needed to be. She did not look at Voss himself. She worked quickly and found what she needed in the jacket's interior. A heavy-duty satellite phone, the kind designed for operation in remote environments beyond cellular infrastructure. Its screen still illuminated from recent use. The most recent outgoing call 7 minutes ago had been to a number with a Washington, D.C. area code. She noted this and moved on. There was a second item in the jacket's inside pocket. She almost missed it, finding it by its weight rather than by sight. A sealed plastic pouch, the kind used for document preservation, containing a single folded sheet. She opened it. It was a list. 12 names formatted as a simple printed document, no letterhead. Corporate titles. The names were attached to organizations she recognized: investment banks, a private equity firm, 2 names with government-adjacent institutional affiliations. Below each name was a notation current active indicating that this was not a historical roster. The network Victor had documented in 1998 had not dissolved. It had refined itself. It had promoted some people and removed others and continued operating through the intervening 27 years. The men on this list were not hiding. They were running things. She put the list in her coat pocket with the original note from her father. She found the satellite phone's dial pad and called the FBI's Boston field office direct line, a number she had memorized from the emergency information card in the shelter on Tremont Street. A card she had read carefully because she believed in knowing the numbers that mattered. The duty agent who answered sounded initially like someone who had been managing a quiet overnight shift and was adjusting to a sudden change in that condition. She did not give him time to manage the call. She managed it herself. "My name is Maya Callahan," she said. "I am currently located on Blackwood Isle in Casco Bay off the Maine coast. I have 2 incapacitated armed operatives in this building, one of whom is sealed in a subterranean vault. I am in possession of a complete documentary record of a financial crime network that has been operating continuously since 1998, implicating individuals currently active in major financial institutions and potentially in government positions. I also have a living witness who was present at the origination of the network and has direct knowledge of its current membership. I need helicopters and I need them before dawn." A pause. "Ma'am, can you repeat the location?" "Blackwood Isle, Casco Bay, Maine. Send helicopters." Through the window of the study over the black mass of the pines and the dark line of the ocean beyond them, the eastern sky had begun its first gray suggestion of morning. Not light yet. The possibility of light. The hour before dawn, when the darkness starts to thin at its edges and the world begins to reassemble itself out of the night. Maya stood with the satellite phone in her hand and looked at it. Then she sat down on the floor of the study, her back against the mahogany desk, and she put the phone down beside her. And for the first time since she had heard the perimeter alarm fire, its shrill pulse through the sleeping house, she allowed her hands to shake. They shook for approximately 30 seconds. Then she made them stop. Ethan appeared in the doorway of the study with Marsh behind him, and she looked at her son in the gray pre-dawn light of the room and found that she had nothing adequate to say and did not try to say anything. He came and sat beside her on the floor. They heard the helicopters 47 minutes later. The helicopters came in pairs, their rotor wash bending the upper branches of the pines and throwing salt spray off the cliff face in sheets. They came from the southeast, following the coastline at low altitude, and the sound of them reached the manor several minutes before their running lights appeared over the tree line. 2 Coast Guard Jayhawks, and behind them a third aircraft, with no exterior markings, that descended onto the front lawn of Sterling Manor, with the deliberate authority of something that doesn't need to announce itself. Maya stood on the front steps and watched them land. She had not changed her coat. She had not washed her face. She had found a glass in the kitchen and filled it with water and drunk it standing at the sink. And she had done the same for Ethan and for Gerald Marsh. And that was the extent of what she had done in the 47 minutes between her phone call to the FBI's Boston field office and the arrival of the aircraft. She had used the remaining time to sit on the floor of the study with her son, and to think with the particular clarity that comes after extreme exertion when the body has committed everything it has and is running on the clean, cold fuel of aftermath. She had thought about the list in her coat pocket, the 12 names with their corporate titles and their current active notations. She had thought about the file in the vault, the hundreds of documents in their organized manila folders, the Credit Suisse letterhead, the Bear Stearns transaction logs dated to the autumn of 1998. She had thought about Gerald Marsh currently seated in the study's leather chair, with a wool blanket from the linen closet around his shoulders, and the careful stillness of a man conserving what remained of his physical reserves. She had thought about what all of it was worth and to whom and in what sequence the next several hours needed to be handled in order to ensure that the answer to that question was not determined by anyone other than her. The lead agent from the unmarked helicopter was a woman named Carver, mid-40s, with the compact efficiency of someone who had spent a career learning to assess situations that had already gone past the point of neat containment. She came up the front steps of the manor with 2 agents flanking her and stopped in front of Maya with the directness of someone who did not believe in wasting time on preamble. "Miss Callahan," Agent Carver, "we have the island perimeter secured. Coast Guard has the cove. Can you walk me through the situation inside?" 2 operatives, Maya said. One incapacitated in the kitchen from chemical exposure, non-lethal. He needs medical attention. One sealed in the subterranean vault on the basement level. The vault has an emergency lockdown protocol that restricts oxygen. He went in approximately 90 minutes ago. You should prioritize getting him out. She paused. He's a criminal, but he shouldn't suffocate. Carver looked at her for a moment with an expression that contained something Maya interpreted as recalibration. The specific adjustment a professional makes when the person they are talking to turns out to be different from the person they prepared to talk to. "The third," Carver said. "The foyer," Maya said. Carver turned to one of the flanking agents and gave instructions without raising her voice. The agent moved. Carver turned back to Maya. "And the witness you mentioned." "Gerald Marsh, inside. He's been held in this building for 8 months. He needs a doctor, food, and a warm room in roughly that order. He was Victor Callahan's chief accountant. He has direct knowledge of the network's operations from 1998 through approximately 6 months before my father's death. His testimony combined with the documentary record in the vault is, I understand, what you need." "You understand correctly," Carver said. "Then we need to talk about what I need," Maya said. Carver looked at her for a moment. Something that might have been in a different context. The beginning of a smile. "Let's go inside," she said. The next 4 hours were controlled chaos of the federal variety agents moving through the manor with equipment and evidence bags, a field medic attending to the man from the kitchen, who turned out to have a name, an identity, a history with 2 prior federal charges that had never resulted in prosecution. The vault being opened under Maya's supervision with Carver present, and the systematic cataloging of what was inside it, beginning with a reverence that the situation warranted. Gerald Marsh was taken to the unmarked helicopter and given to the care of a physician who had apparently come prepared for exactly this type of situation, which told Maya something about what the FBI had understood from her phone call and how seriously they had taken it. Ethan sat in the kitchen with a Coast Guard officer who had, with admirable professional instinct, produced a granola bar and a deck of cards from somewhere on his person, and was conducting what appeared to be a patient tutorial in a card game Maya did not recognize from a distance. She checked on him twice in the first hour, and found him increasingly absorbed in the lesson and decreasingly in need of checking on which was the best possible condition for him to be in. The sun came fully up around 7:30, a pale winter sun that came in through the manor's east-facing windows and moved across the marble floors in long, gradual rectangles. It did not make the house warm, but it made it visible in a way the night had not allowed. And in the light of an ordinary January morning, the grand foyer with its wrecked chandelier and its dark marble and its white-sheeted furniture looked less like a Gothic fortress and more like what it actually was, a very large, very isolated house built by a man who had needed to put as much physical distance as possible between himself and the consequences of what he had done. The vault. When Carver's team opened it and began working through its contents, with the systematic attention of people who understood what they were looking at, produced an effect on the senior agents present that Maya had not expected, and then recognized as the response of professionals who encounter rarely in a career evidence of a scale that exceeds their preparation for it. She stood in the doorway of the vault while they worked, watching them, and she thought about the document she had not told anyone about yet. The list of 12 names in the sealed plastic pouch from Voss's jacket, currently in the pocket of her coat, alongside her father's handwritten note, and the scrap from the original envelope. She made a decision about the order of operations. She went to find Carver. Prescott Langley arrived by privately chartered boat at 11:15 in the morning. Maya saw him from the study window. A small vessel coming into the cove, past the Coast Guard cutters being waved through after she assumed Langley had produced credentials of some kind, the authority of a senior attorney representing the estate's legal interests. He came up the path with 2 junior associates and the particular posture of a man who has convinced himself that the situation is still manageable, that the correct combination of professional authority and controlled narrative will restore order to something that has gone sideways. He came through the front doors, which the federal agents had propped open for equipment access, and stopped in the foyer with his eyes on the wreckage of the chandelier for exactly long enough to understand what the wreckage meant. Then he collected himself and looked for Maya. She was sitting in the parlor off the foyer in one of the chairs that had been uncovered when the dust sheets were removed during the evidence sweep. She had a cup of tea that one of the Coast Guard officers had made her from supplies in the kitchen, and she was holding it in both hands. And she looked. She was aware like a woman who had been awake all night in a house where violent things had happened. Which was accurate. Langley came into the parlor with his junior associates behind him, and his gold-framed glasses and his charcoal suit that was still immaculate because he had come from the mainland and not spent the night in a stone house fighting for his life. "Sarah," he said. He used the wrong name without appearing to notice. "Do not say anything further to these agents. The firm will take responsibility for managing the estate's legal exposure. There are aspects of Victor's affairs that require careful handling, and I strongly advise you to allow us to—" "My name is Maya," she said. He stopped. Maya Callahan, not Sarah. You've represented my father's estate for 27 years, and you don't know my name. She set the tea down on the side table beside her. Or you know it perfectly well and you've already decided I don't matter enough to use correctly. Langley reset his expression into something that was designed to read as patient professionalism. Maya, the important thing right now is that we present a coherent account of you designed the 6-month residency requirement in my father's will, Maya said. Specifically, you inserted a legal mechanism that would bring me to this island and confine me here in a way that made me available to the people who came last night. You used a bereavement document, a legally binding instrument, to deliver a woman and her 8-year-old son to an isolated location where armed men were going to arrive and use them to access a vault. The parlor was quiet. One of the junior associates had stopped moving entirely. That's a significant accusation, Langley said. His voice had changed register very slightly. It is, Maya said, Agent Carver. Carver came through the parlor doorway. Behind her, 2 agents. Mr. Langley, Carver said, we'd like you to come with us. What happened to Langley's face in that moment was not dramatic. It was small and specific. The particular contraction of a man who has run the calculation and arrived at an answer he did not want. The junior associates looked at each other. Nobody moved for a count of 3. Then Langley's hands very slowly came up from his sides. Maya looked at him for a moment. She thought about the gold-framed glasses and the calibrated sympathy in the conference room on State Street, and the smooth, professional voice explaining the terms of a will that had been engineered as a delivery mechanism. You used a grieving daughter, she said. You used an 8-year-old child. Whatever understanding you had with my father's enemies, whatever arrangement kept you comfortable for 27 years, you knew what you were sending us into. She did not wait for a response. There was no response that mattered. She picked up her tea and looked out the parlor window at the January sky over Casco Bay. Pale and cold and entirely ordinary. And she let them take Prescott Langley out of the room without watching them do it. Marcus Webb arrived on the island by helicopter at 1 in the afternoon, which was, Maya reflected, extremely fast for a Washington, D.C. attorney, who had been contacted at 6 in the morning by a woman calling from a satellite phone on a private island in Casco Bay. It suggested either that he had been very close to Boston already, or that the situation as she had described it in their 20-minute call had been sufficiently compelling to produce extraordinary speed. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, with the physical economy of a man who does not waste motion, and he came off the helicopter with a leather case and the specific quality of attention that Maya had learned to associate with people who were very good at a thing and knew it without needing to perform the knowledge. He shook her hand with a directness that she appreciated. You should know, he said without preamble as they walked toward the manor, that what you've described to me this morning, if it holds up to the examination I'm about to give, it is one of the most significant financial whistleblower actions attempted under Dodd-Frank since the statute's inception. The documentary scale alone, if the vault contents are what you say they are, places this in a category that the SEC's whistleblower office has never encountered in quite this form. Does that help me or complicate things? Maya said. Both, Webb said. But mostly it helps you because the government's interest in successful prosecution of a network this size and this durably active will be significant enough that they will want you accommodated. The bounty structure under Dodd-Frank is straightforward original information leading to successful enforcement action, minimum 10%, maximum 30% of sanctions recovered. The standard negotiated outcome for a case of this quality is 20%. 20% of 200 million, Maya said. That's the minimum recoverable figure, Webb said. Based on what you've described, the full scope of recoverable assets may be considerably larger once the current network's positions are assessed. But, working from the documented figure $40 million federally sanctioned clean, Maya was quiet for a moment. They had reached the front steps. And the residency requirement in the will, she said. The 6 months. The duress argument is straightforward, Webb said. Criminal intent by the drafter of the relevant clause combined with the physical threat to which you were subjected. As a direct result of compliance with that clause, provides grounds for invalidation of the condition without affecting the bequest itself. The legitimate assets, the Fidelity portfolio, and the commercial real estate holdings transfer to you unconditionally. I'll have the motion filed in federal court before the end of the week. Maya looked out at the cove where the Coast Guard cutters sat in the gray water, and the Albatross's dock groaned in the January swell. Then let's go inside, she said. I have a list to give you. She produced the sealed plastic pouch from her coat pocket and handed it to Webb. He opened it, unfolded the sheet, and read it with the attention of someone reading something that requires close reading. He was quiet for a long moment. Where did this come from? He said. The jacket of the man who ran the operation last night, Maya said. He came here with a list of the current membership, which tells me someone in that network authorized this operation, which means someone on that list knows their name is in my father's vault. That list combined with the vault contents and Marsh's testimony is the complete picture. Webb refolded the sheet and placed it carefully back in the pouch. Miss Callahan, he said, I want you to understand something. The individuals on this list have significant resources and significant motivation to complicate any proceeding against them. This will not be a short or simple process. I know, Maya said. It will require your sustained cooperation over a period of months, possibly years. Depositions, testimony, constant scrutiny of your background and circumstances. Mr. Webb, Maya said. I spent 2 winters calculating whether I had enough change for a bus fare. I think I can manage sustained. He looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same general territory. I think you probably can, he said. The legal proceedings that followed the events on Blackwood Isle moved with the careful, grinding momentum of federal justice, which is to say, they moved slowly, and then at certain moments, very fast. The Department of Justice seized the vault's contents under a federal warrant within 72 hours of Maya's call to the Boston field office. Gerald Marsh was taken into protective custody and evaluated by both physicians and federal prosecutors over a period of 2 weeks, at the end of which the DOJ's assessment of his testimony was, according to Webb, that it was the single most valuable piece of human evidence the department had encountered in a financial crime investigation in over a decade. Prescott Langley was arrested and charged within a week. The charges, as Webb explained them to Maya in the conference room of his Washington office, were substantial and specific conspiracy to commit wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and an accessory charge related to the events on Blackwood Isle that Webb described with the clipped precision of a man who had spent considerable time ensuring that each element was airtight. Langley's firm, Langley and Associates, was dissolved within 30 days by court order. The 12 names on the list from Voss's jacket became the subjects of federal investigation, within the same week their names appearing in sealed proceedings that would not become public for another 8 months, at which point the scale of the network's post-1998 operations would produce a level of financial press coverage that Maya would observe from a distance with the detached interest of someone who has seen the machinery from the inside. 4 of the 12 cooperated with federal prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges. The remaining 8 were indicted. None of this happened quickly. All of it happened. Maya was in Washington for 10 days immediately following the events on the island, giving depositions and meeting with the SEC's whistleblower office, and sitting in conference rooms with Webb and federal prosecutors, and occasionally with people who did not introduce themselves by name or title. She left Ethan with a woman from the Boston FBI field office who had children of her own, and who had, without being asked, arranged for him to have a room with a television and access to a school enrollment contact in the event that things extended beyond 2 weeks. Maya noted this act of practical kindness and filed it alongside the other evidence she had been accumulating her entire life that the world was not uniformly hostile, only selectively so. The federal court's ruling on the will's residency requirement came through 3 weeks after Webb filed the motion. The judge's language was unambiguous. The clause had been drafted with demonstrable criminal intent by an attorney subsequently charged with federal crimes, and it was invalidated in its entirety. The legitimate assets of the Callahan estate transferred to Maya without condition. She sat in Webb's office and looked at the documents for a long time. The whistleblower bounty was formally awarded 11 weeks after her initial filing. The SEC's processing accelerated by the extraordinary scope of the enforcement action, and by the personal involvement of the Commission's director who had, according to Webb, described the Callahan case in an internal memo as the clearest example of Dodd-Frank operating exactly as intended that the Commission had seen since the statute's passage. 20% of the recovered assets, $40 million, clean federally sanctioned and deposited into an account established by Webb's firm in Maya Callahan's name at a bank in Boston that was not affiliated with any of the 12 names on the list. She did not feel what she had expected to feel when the number became real. She had expected something large and disorienting, the emotional equivalent of the room spinning when Langley had first announced the estate's value in the State Street conference room. What she felt instead was quieter and more specific, the sensation of a calculation that had been running in the background of her mind for 2 years, the constant low-level computation of whether there would be enough coming to a stop. Not a triumphant stop, just a stop. The problem was solved and the machinery could rest. She thought about the workforce center address in the permanent address field of a job application. She thought about Ethan's even breathing against her side in the alcove on Washington Street. She thought about her father, and she did not think about him with the anger she had carried for 15 years. Because the anger had been useful for 15 years, and she had used it well. And it had done its work, and now it was finished. There was one more thing she had to do before she could leave the island entirely behind her. She went back to Blackwood Isle on a Thursday in late February alone, on a boat arranged by the Federal Estate Administration. With the vault cleared of its evidence and the manor secured as a crime scene, in the process of being released. The federal agents had finished their work. The island was hers to decide about. She walked up the path from the dock in morning light that was still winter thin, but cleaner than it had been in January, the sky over Casco Bay showing a blue. It had not had the month before. She went into the manor through the front doors and stood in the foyer where the chandelier had come down. The floor swept clean now by the evidence team, the empty brass mounting on the ceiling 20 feet above, still trailing a short length of the chain. She walked the house once slowly room by room without a specific destination. The kitchen where she had made soup the first night. The second-floor bedroom where Ethan had slept under the canopy. The study with the cold fireplace and the empty mahogany desk, and the portrait of Victor Callahan above the mantel. She stood in front of the portrait for a while. He looked exactly as he had looked the first time she had seen it. The night she arrived sharp. Jaw-cold blue eyes, the absolute authority of a man who believed the room he was in was his. But she had been awake all night the first time she looked at it, and she was rested now, or rested enough, and she saw something in it she had not registered before. Something around the eyes that was not in the jaw, or the posture. A quality she could not name precisely, but that she recognized as belonging to a man who has built a fortress and is living in it. She went to the basement. She went past the generators and the water filtration system and the sump pump that had been properly repaired by the estate administration's maintenance contractor, and she stood in front of the vault door, which stood open. Now the interior empty and clean under its fluorescent lights. She stood there for a moment in the doorway of the place where her father had spent 27 years building a monument to what he had done, and what he feared and what he could not bring himself to let go of. She thought about the box of documents he had kept separate from the rest, the evidence of the years of watching her from a distance, the photographs, the paid medical bills, the private investigators' reports on the small and unremarkable events of her life that he had monitored without intervening because intervening would have required him to be a different man than he was. The combination is the one thing I never forgot. She had known what to do with the anger. She had used it, and it had done its work, and now it was done. She was less certain, standing in the doorway of the vault, about what to do with the grief. Not grief for the father she had lost, because the father she had been lost long before this winter, lost at a kitchen table in a Beacon Hill townhouse 15 years ago. Grief for the other thing, the thing that the photographs in the box had represented, the version of events that had not happened. The conversation that had not taken place, the 15 years that had gone past, on both sides of a silence that neither of them had found the mechanism to end. She stood in the doorway of the vault until she had felt what she needed to feel. Then she stepped back, closed the vault door, engaged the keypad with the sequence she would change before she left the island today, and went back upstairs. She sat at her father's desk and called the executive director of the New England Women's Coalition, whom Webb had already contacted on her behalf. And they spoke for 40 minutes about what Sterling Manor could become, and what it would require, and what Maya intended to provide. The manor would be fully renovated. The vault would be decommissioned and the space converted. The isolation that had made the island a fortress would make it with the proper infrastructure. Something else, a location whose remoteness was a feature rather than a punishment. A place where women and children in crisis could come and be genuinely removed from the situations they were escaping, with professional staff and proper medical access, and the kind of security that the island's position naturally provided. Maya would fund the renovation and the endowment from her own resources. She would attach no conditions to the gift, except one that the facility be named not for her father, not for the Callahan name, but for the purpose it served. When she ended the call, she sat at the mahogany desk for another moment in the winter light from the study window and looked at the portrait of Victor Callahan one last time. "You are the only one I ever trusted to do this correctly." She thought that was probably true in the way that certain things a person says at the end of their life are true, not complete, not uncomplicated, but real in the specific way that a final accounting is real, stripped of the protective layers that ordinary living requires. She took the portrait down from above the fireplace. She set it against the wall, with its face toward the stone. Then she went to find the maintenance contractor who was waiting on the dock to take her back to the mainland. Spring came to Brookline, Massachusetts, the way it always comes to New England, reluctantly in stages with several apparent retreats before it finally commits. The forsythia along the back fence of the property on Walnut Street came up yellow in the first week of April, and then a late frost came through and flattened everything, and then 2 weeks later, it came back stubborn and unconvinced by the setback, the way growing things in New England learn to be. The house was a colonial on a quiet street, white clapboard with dark shutters, with a fenced backyard that the real estate agent had described as generous by Brookline standards, which meant it was not large by the standards of the country at large. But it was large enough for a golden retriever and an 8-year-old boy to conduct the extended and apparently rule-governed game they had developed over the preceding 3 weeks, the precise rules of which had never been fully explained to Maya, but which seemed to involve a tennis ball, a specific corner of the fence, and a scoring system that Ethan maintained in his head, with the same serious precision he brought to most things. The dog's name was Cooper. He had come from a rescue organization in Jamaica Plain, 6 weeks after they moved in on the recommendation of a woman at Ethan's school whose children had dogs from the same organization, and who had stopped Meyer at pickup one afternoon in March to make the suggestion with the frank neighborliness of someone who has decided that a new family on the street warrants direct attention. Maya was learning in increments how to receive that kind of attention without the reflexive assessment of threat that 2 years of street life had built into her response to unsolicited approach. It was not a fast process. It was the kind of unlearning that happens in small moments. A conversation at school pickup, a cup of coffee accepted from a neighbor, the particular ease of a morning when nothing needs to be calculated. She was at the kitchen counter with her second cup of coffee on a Saturday in mid-April when her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus Webb. The federal sentencing in the first of the network prosecutions had been handed down the previous afternoon, 18 years, for the first cooperating witness who had subsequently recanted his cooperation. A decision the judge had noted in her sentencing remarks as one of the more inexplicable choices she had observed in a long career on the federal bench. The message from Webb was characteristic in its economy: 1 down, 7 to go. Marsh testified well. She set the phone down and looked out the kitchen window at the yard, where Ethan was explaining something to Cooper, with the earnestness of someone who genuinely believes the other party is following along. Cooper's attention was on the tennis ball in Ethan's hand rather than on the explanation, but he was listening with his whole body in the way that dogs listen, and it counted. There was a garden box along the south fence that had come with the house built by the previous owners and maintained until recently, with vegetables she hadn't planted. She had been looking at it for 3 weeks trying to decide what to put in it. Webb had mentioned in passing during one of their calls that tomatoes were easier than people thought, and that a raised bed in a south-facing yard was close to ideal conditions. She did not know why she had retained this information. She had retained it anyway. She thought about Gerald Marsh currently living in a federal protective housing arrangement in a city she had not been told the name of, preparing for the testimony that would constitute the remaining months of his legal usefulness to the government that was housing and feeding him. He had sent her a card 2 months ago through Webb's office, a plain note card with a brief message in careful handwriting that expressed gratitude without excess. The kind of gratitude that has thought about what it is saying. She had kept the card in the kitchen drawer. She thought about Captain Hayes, who had returned in February with the scheduled supply drop to find a Coast Guard presence and a crime scene, and no Maya Callahan, and who had subsequently given a statement to federal agents that was, according to Carver, notable for its completeness and its utter lack of surprise at any of the events described. She had written him a letter, brief and specific, because she thought he deserved to know that the woman he had ferried to the island on a January afternoon had come through it. She did not know if he had read it. She had written it anyway. She thought about her father. She did this less than she had in the weeks immediately following the island, and differently. Not the structured absence that 15 years of deliberate forgetting had built, and not the acute presence of the weeks after Blackwood Isle, when the journal entries and the photographs and the handwritten note were too recent to sit with in any comfort. Something else now. Something more like the way you think about a place you have been that has changed you. a place that is complete in your memory and does not require return. The combination is the one thing I never forgot. She had thought on the island that this was the only apology he knew how to make. She still thought that. She had also come to think in the months since that it was not nothing. That a man who had built a life on the erasure of vulnerability had spent 27 years unable to erase that one date. August 14th, 1993. That it had been the center of the most heavily secured thing he had ever built. That she had been in some calculus she would never fully know the thing he trusted most, even as he was most unable to reach it. It was not enough. She had never needed it to be enough. It was what it was, a partial thing, human-sized, and she had made her peace with its partiality in the doorway of the empty vault on a February morning in winter light. She had burned the photographs in the fireplace of the study before she left the island, not out of anger, because she had looked at them as long as she needed to, and the looking was complete, and she did not want to carry them forward into the life she was building. She had kept the handwritten note. It was in the kitchen drawer with Gerald Marsh's card. She did not take it out often. When she did, she read it once and put it back. "You are the only one I ever trusted to do this correctly." She had done it correctly. Outside, Ethan threw the tennis ball, and Cooper launched himself across the yard with the full commitment of a dog who has decided that this right now, this exact pursuit is the most important thing that has ever happened. He hit the fence corner at full speed, reversed without apparent injury, and came back across the yard with the ball and an expression of complete satisfaction. Ethan turned toward the kitchen window, and when he saw her watching, he raised one hand in the brief, easy wave of a child who has found after a period of difficulty that he is where he is supposed to be. Maya raised her coffee cup in return. She stood at the kitchen window for another moment in the April light, and then she set her cup on the counter and went out the back door and into the yard, where the forsythia was coming in yellow along the fence, and the ground was soft from the recent rain, and she thought she might look at the garden box today. She thought she might figure out what she was gonna plant in it. Tomatoes were easier than people thought. She had a south-facing yard. It seemed like a reasonable place to start,